to Arusha to try and find out more about the UN tribunals. Everyone's heard about the Rwanda Tribunal, and as an academic, I thought I should know about it too. When I got there in June of 2003, I met my client. It seemed to be a decent enough sort, and then the chief prosecutor, Carla Del Ponte, had a press conference in which she announced publicly that the former president of Rwanda, Habyarimana, had been killed by the current president of Rwanda, Kagame, and that the UN was ready to prosecute Kagame for that crime and to prosecute the RPF forces under Kagame who had committed crimes. And this came from the chief prosecutor. I was stunned. I knew nothing about there being another reality to the Rwandan genocide story. I expected it to be the same story all of us had heard. But after the prosecutor announced this world-changing, in my mind, event, Paul Kagame called for her to be removed from office the next day. Not surprising. But what was surprising is I was sitting at the bar in the Impala Hotel watching CNN. Colin Powell was responding to questions about the search for the weapons of mass destruction in the summer of 2003. And while I was sitting there trying to decide whether I was going to take a case, Colin Powell described to the rest of the press in Washington that the weapons of mass destruction would be found at any minute now. Just please wait. We know they're there. Of course, we know that that wasn't exactly true. But also during that press conference, he was asked a question about Kagame's call to have Carla Del Ponte removed from office because she recommended prosecuting him. Colin Powell said, yes, we agree with that policy, and went on. Probably no one in the world caught that except a guy sitting in Arusha, Tanzania, trying to decide whether he was going to take a case in the tribunal when the day before the chief prosecutor had just told him and the rest of the world that the story about the Rwandan genocide that they had heard was untrue, and that she had the evidence to prosecute Kagame and the evidence to prosecute the RPF, and Colin Powell was calling for her resignation. 2 months later, she was removed from office, and no one associated with the side that won the war has faced any charges at the UN tribunal at all in the last 16 years. That means that the Rwanda Tribunal by the UN is either a victor's tribunal, like the Nuremberg and Tokyo tribunals after World War II, or the Rwanda War, 5 years of it, which preceded the Rwanda Genocide and continues afterward. Either it's a victor's tribunal, or this war has been the only one in history in which only one side committed crimes, because that's what the UN tribunal has decided, in spite of the fact that the chief prosecutor knows that that's not the truth. So, as a result of that work, as a defense lawyer at the tribunal, I got discovery from a prosecution that was not using any UN documents to prosecute the defendants, although the UN had people in Rwanda during the entire period of the genocide, and was issuing daily reports on what was going on. None of those reports were being used to prosecute the people who were being accused of crime. When I was able to get the documents that had been accumulated about what was happening between UN headquarters and the airport, which is where my client had his command responsibility, I found out that none of the documents that the RPF or that the prosecutor had that related to that area where my client was the commander. Those documents, it took a year for me to get, and finally the documents showed that in fact there were no reports of crimes being committed by my client or by his troops in that area. Moreover, he was the guy that the UN had to go to every day, many times a day, in order to get to the airport to do their work. And there was nothing but laudatory comments about my client in the UN reports. Now, I understood why the UN reports were not being used by the prosecutor. And I set out to get more reports. And I was able to get into UN headquarters. I'm the only defense lawyer at the ICTR that has ever been able to do that. And I've been able to put together a document file of some 30,000 documents that are on a website, rwandadocumentsproject.net, that had the effect of bringing into the ICTR evidence about what actually did happen in Rwanda day by day, almost minute by minute, that have been in the UN files since they were created in April through July 1994. And except for my being able to get at them, they've been completely suppressed for the last 16 years. Because I was able to get at those documents, I was also able to show that there's another explanation for how this mass violence happened, because it is true that mass violence happened in Rwanda. It means many people were killed because they were Tutsi. Many people were killed because of their ethnicity. But what the UN documents also show is that there was a war that had been going on for nearly 5 years. The country was completely destabilized, and at the end of 1993, the military of the country next door, Burundi, assassinated the Burundian president, who was the first elected Hutu president of Burundi, and the country exploded. 250,000 people or so killed, probably. 250,000 coming into Rwanda. All of these in October of 1993 to the end of 93, as Bob Flaten was just ending his term. The reality is that the State Department understood quite well that if the Arusha Accord ceasefire was broken, that was preventing war in Rwanda, that the events in Burundi would have caused Rwanda to explode, as an example for Rwanda. So what we now know is that the current president of Rwanda, Mr. Kagame, was warned beforehand that if he broke the ceasefire, that he would be responsible for mass violence of a communal nature, like happened in Burundi, would also happen in Rwanda. We now know, because of the revelations of the former Secretary General of the ruling party of Rwanda, Dr. Rudasingwa, that, of course, that assassination by Mr. Kagame of Habyarimana, in fact, did happen and led to the mass killings that we know about. But it's a complicated question, because people got killed for lots of reasons. And our purpose here today is to begin a process of truth and reconciliation in Rwanda that has not been able to get started up until now, because knowing the truth has not been possible. The documents have been suppressed by the UN. The story about what happened in Rwanda has been distorted by the U.S. because of their own involvement, in my view. But where we are now is that a new day is going to have to start in Rwanda, and we have to start this new day in Central Africa also, because as you know, there's violence in the Congo today that's related to this assassination and the politics that led to that. The invasion of Somalia that's going on today by forces of Burundi and Uganda are part of this story. The human rights peacekeepers in Darfur are Rwandan troops that are taken from the eastern Congo, where they're stealing minerals to the tune of about $250 million a year, and then sent from that operation up to Darfur to be peacekeepers in Darfur. The entire region of Eastern Africa has been affected by this assassination in ways that have changed the history of Eastern Africa. This is the first meeting in history, after these disclosures and this evidence has been put into the record, in which leading members of each side of this struggle, Hutu and the Tutsi side, are meeting in public to acknowledge that both sides are responsible for the violence, that both sides committed crimes, that both sides have to accept responsibility and go forward to reconciliation based on the idea that everyone had a piece of the Rwandan genocide. So this event is really not for those of us in this room. This event is being simulcast worldwide. It's the first time that people in Rwanda, people in the Congo, people in Burundi, people in Uganda, people in East Africa are going to find out for the first time how it was the Rwandan genocide actually began, and that the responsibility does have to be shared. There are no good guys and no bad guys absolutely in this matter, except in my view, for United States policy. Because the evidence also makes clear that at the time that the crimes of the RPF, or portions of the RPF, because as Eugene mentioned to me, of course, it wasn't everyone, that's true. But it's been clear that the U.S. has known about this since September of 1994, and that they've systematically covered it up since that time. And we have the cable to Warren Christopher, the Secretary of State, that explains both the revelation and cables that show the cover-up later. So tonight, we're going to make use of that research by making history by having a first meeting in which truth and reconciliation for Rwanda can be discussed. But to get at the truth, we have to get past a problem. The problem is that if anyone in Rwanda, or anyone who is from Minnesota who goes to Rwanda, who has written an article saying, you know, the way the government is explaining how the war happened is not true, that means that that person is a genocide denier. Well, you heard that applied to me when I was arrested in the summer in 2010. But of course, if genocide denier means denying that the violence occurred and that it was terrible and it was awful, it makes no sense. But if genocide denier means differing with the way the government said that it carried out the war and how the government said all the violence happened, it's clear that the evidence does not support that story anymore. So that means all of us on the stage, to the extent that they're willing to consider an alternative, are genocide deniers. They would stand with me in the dock in Rwanda just the way that my former client, Victoire Ingabire, is in jail, on trial today in Rwanda based on charges that are trumped up with documents that no one has ever seen. It means that to the extent that we're not careful with security, our lives are not safe either. Kagame has put out a dead or alive order for me. Paul Rusesabagina, something similar. Dr. Rudasingwa, also something similar. I think, and Bob Flaten has been accused of being a gun runner for the genocidaires by the U.S., by the Rwandan ambassador to the U.S. So you should know that these are the kind of people who are in front of you today. The program I'm going to turn over to my colleagues, and we are very fortunate to have Prime Minister Ali Galayd here as the moderator. Prime Minister Galayd served in the Somali government for many years, was at the Humphrey Institute here for the last 7 or 8 years. But his perspective is the perspective from the region as to how this mistelling of the Rwandan genocide story has affected the politics of the entire region and is actually affecting politics in Somalia today. That'll be part of the contribution, but he will be the moderator. I sit down. The first speaker that I'm going to ask to address us will be Robert Flaten from the U.S. Ambassador to Rwanda, who was in Kigali in the years 90 to the end of 93. He will be explaining his take on it. We have Paul and Theogene will be talking about it from their viewpoints. Since Paul already spoke this morning, he's going to speak less now and will be leaving early. And the rest of us will continue the conversation. But the important thing for people here in this room to understand is while it seems like there's not a whole lot of people in the audience, it's not a big roaring event. Of course not. Earlier today, we had people from the Rwandan government here challenging us and calling Paul, what did they accuse you of being a terrorist, I think.
Well, I'm a terrorist, I'm financing terrorists, I'm a genocide denier, I'm a negationist, I'm a genocide ideologist, everything.
And so with that, and with that disclaimer, so that you know the character of the people who are on this podium, I've chosen them specifically because of that character, actually. But I hope you can ask questions at the end of the event, although Paul will have to leave early. So with that, I think that I'll leave the rest of the program up to Prime Minister Galayd, and we're going to have small presentations by each of the four of us, and then discussion. But the presentation will be no more than 5 minutes, just to get the discussion going. So, Professor Galayd.
Thanks, Peter. You don't hear me. Good afternoon. The before it's too late and you're a bit drowsy, I'd like to invite the ambassador to make his comments while he was a witness of what was going on in that troubled country. And since then, I'm sure he has spent a lot of time thinking about it. So, ambassador.
Thank you. Actually, I wasn't there when the killing started, although I had witnessed occasional smaller violence that led up to it, and which was the basis on which many of us spoke with the RPF as well as with the Rwandan government, saying this agreement must be implemented or more violence is likely to take place. I spent only about 3 years in Rwanda, and I grew very fond of the Rwandans. I worked with all of them because it was our government's policy to encourage democracy, and because President Habyarimana, when I first presented my credentials, asked me if the United States would be helpful to Rwanda in creating democracy where it had never existed. I told him I'd love to, and that was basically what occupied me for the next 3 years. I also warned him that democracy is not a simple process. We've been working at it for 200 years in my country, and we haven't perfected it yet. But at the time, during those 3 years, we got together with all of the various political factions in the country. And I worked with all of them. Hutu, Tutsi, North, South, Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, even the Twa. And all of us felt that there was a possibility that a proper policy of power sharing could happen. And it got close enough so we had an agreement that was signed in Arusha in August of 1993. And so there was a real dialogue among the various antagonistic groups, and then of course it collapsed. And the purpose, I think, of trying to bring together a concept of truth and reconciliation among Rwandans, it's going to be a whole lot harder now. But it's still, there is a precedent in which Rwandans of ethnic groups and of religious have started. And maybe we can help them restart that process that was begun and failed. And I don't want to talk much because I think we have a couple of people here who can represent the concept of using the truth that Peter has worked so hard to develop, using that truth as a means of developing a bit of trust between the parties and as a means of building trust which can ultimately lead to reconciliation. And the one thing that is most important to me and most impressive to me was although the differences existed, North and South and Tutsi and Hutu, they all have a concept of being Rwandans. And the two here don't look exactly alike, but they are both very, very much Rwandans. And they believe that and they sense it. And so there is a basis for the dialogue that I hope could bring some reconciliation among the people with whom I lived, worked, and became very fond.
Well, thank you again. I was speaking about 1.5 hours ago.
Rusesabagina.
I'm back again since many of you were not here. But me, I have 4 issues to bring to the table. Those 4 issues are human rights abuses before the genocide, during the genocide, and even after the genocide. Another issue is justice, which has been a one-way street. No. The winner's justice. The third one is the freedom of press. Rwanda is a country where people are not allowed actually to speak out to their mind, to tell what they feel like telling. The fourth one is political space. Political space is completely locked. You can get in. And the only excuse is that we cannot allow political space. Development is enough. You feel satisfied by development. And development without being able to vote for who you want, to be who you want, then that development is more or less nothing, built on the sand, not on the rock. Well, I think I've finished. This is a round table, and people will also get up and ask questions. We'll exchange and tell what you think.
It's my pleasure to now give the Rwanda CEO, if you can go to the podium and give your presentation.
Not really. I'm not going to.
Just keep it.
I'm not going to give a presentation as such. I just want to share a few things, just from a perspective of what I have announced recently. Because, as you know, on the 1st of October, I did give a confession. For those who are Roman Catholics, I'm sure you are very familiar with confessions. Those who are not, you know that confessions about doing something wrong are always very, very, very difficult. But I want to make sure that I mention to you today that it's also something very, very important to do in one's life. But before I do that, Rwanda's history, as my colleague Paul was telling the earlier audience, it's a long history, as I'm sure Ambassador Flaten was able to learn. Our country is much, much older than the United States. We're a country that has been in existence, a nation that has been in existence for centuries. At the end of the 1800s, we became colonized by the Germans when the imperial powers were trying to capture territory for various reasons in Africa. Then at the end of the First World War, we exchanged hands into the Belgian authorities' hands. Then 1962, we became formally independent from Belgium. And since that time, as my colleague was trying to explain to you, even though we've been nominally independent from colonial powers, we've not managed our affairs very well. And so one of the first victims of that independence era, or maybe I should say that there was what, I'm sure when you read books, you'll see what is being described as 1959 revolution. And that is the period when power exchanged hands from Tutsi kings into the hands of a Hutu elite. That's what really happened at the time of 1959 revolution. And because of that, a section of the Rwandan population, the Tutsis, became refugees. So I'm one of actually the generation of Rwandans who were either born around that time or were born in exile, but who actually lived in refugee camps for almost 3 decades. In fact, I did live in a refugee camp until we took up arms against the government of the day in 1990. I say that also to show you later on that for now, as we speak, whereas from 1959 to 1990, or 1994, the refugees were Tutsis. Now from 1994 up to now as we speak, the refugees are now Hutu. And that's a very important point to note, and it's very much related to the problem of reconciliation. And so I have been a refugee, as I've said, and I became a rebel soldier, took up arms against the government of the day, and my organization was able to capture state power in 1990. But we captured state power at a very, very expensive price. Because when you lose 1 million people, and subsequently, as you've heard from Peter and from others, many, many Rwandans have died since then, up to now, not only in Rwanda, but also in the Congo. Then you ask yourself, what kind of victory was it? If you lose 1 million people, or 2 million people, whatever the number, for me it really doesn't matter. Even one person should not be dying. And I hate to hear people saying, oh, poor these few people died, or life has become so cheap in Rwanda that people, especially the president of that country, talk about life very, very lightly. And so it was a very expensive military victory. And because one side won militarily, as my other colleagues have said, the RPF under Kagame has dictated the kind of narrative we have in Rwanda. And one of the defining elements of our recent history has actually been who killed President Habyarimana, who shot down the plane. And what I mentioned in my confession is something that other Rwandans had said before me. It's something that many in the international community actually knew, but were not willing to accept. Maybe what was new was that it was me saying it. But to be honest, I do not think that I was particularly saying anything particularly new. And you would then ask, how relevant is it to truth-telling? I happen to be one of the members of an organization called Rwanda National Congress that is now almost 1 year old, which is trying to preach this message of reconciliation and healing and peaceful transformation of Rwanda. And when we've gone to Rwandans across the ethnic divide, the Hutus and Tutsis, here in America, in Canada, in Europe, and everywhere we've gone, always, without exception, people always ask me or ask my colleagues, who actually killed President Habyarimana? And it always put me in a very difficult situation, because on the one hand, I knew the truth of who actually did it, but on the other, I had not actually crossed the threshold of fear to say, actually, I know who did it, and this is the guy who did it. Because I have known this for many years, and it's only recent, on the 1st of October 2011, that I had to do it. And I had to do it because of the theme of today, which is, can we as Rwandans begin to talk to each other first and foremost, even without playing to the gallery? Because very often when foreigners are watching, like the gentlemen and ladies who are, I think gentlemen who are asking questions, most likely these are people from that Kagame sends from all over America. He pays for their tickets, he pays for their hotels, to appear wherever Paul is so that they can be disruptive, to be where I speak so that they can be disruptive. And sometimes I joke about it, I say, guys, you're so lucky because you're in America where you have the luxury of being able to speak your mind and you won't be penalized for it. Because if you are in Rwanda and you say the kind of things that I or Peter or Paul or any other Rwandan would love to speak about, whatever is going in the country, you pay a heavy price, and sometimes the price is your life. Why I like this whole, why I'm very much interested in this whole issue of truth-telling, is that, as you know, while I was in the government, the likes of Peter wouldn't be my friend. No, because Peter, in academic circles or as you know how universities are, professors actually are normally, and students are normally encouraged to be heretics, to say things that are so crazy that everybody asks the question, why is this guy doing this? And so the likes of Peter, who said things, and his sister keep on things. When I was in the government, I would say, why is this guy saying things of this nature? Like, let me give you just two examples. Like on the question of genocide, which question the other fellows were asking. I believe that it was a genocide of the Tutsis. I believe that an event like that one was planned. But when I talk to Peter and he encourages me to think, he says, there is evidence that shows that actually maybe there wasn't planning. I don't shut my mind and say, no, Peter, don't even go there. I don't want to listen to that. Or when he says the RPF was being supported by the Pentagon and Americans to make sure that it's strong and wins, because I was part of the leadership of the RPF, I say, Peter, I disagree with you on that point, but I'm open-minded. You can convince me. Then he says, I can show you the evidence. The problem with Rwanda is that we've closed our, and it's not simply Rwandans who have that natural inclination to be closed-minded, but governments of the day, because of power calculations, they encourage people to be very close-minded, and they don't want to be open-minded to telling each other truth, so that we can begin to see our history as a shared history of the good and the bad, because that's what history is all about. Even for you Americans, when you look into your past, the 200 years of your history, what do you see? You see stains. You see stains of slavery. You see stains of the Civil War. You see stains of how, Americans abroad have not always been the magnanimous superpower that we would like to believe it is. But that is your history. You even have monuments that show you that dark part of our history, because that's your history, the good and the bad. And so the Rwandans, because of the powers of the day, and because power in Rwanda has always been, until now, we haven't been able to change that, especially, of course, for centuries it was the Tutsi king, and he was the king and everybody were subjects. And of course, since 1959, it has been power, first from a Hutu elite, and then 1994, it changed hands once again into the hands of a Hutu elite. And so because of this, whenever one small group captures state power, it becomes what I think we're talking about it earlier in our conversation. It's the winner takes it all. Or in economics, what people have called the zero-sum game. When I capture power, I must make sure that the other side suffers. And the other side either dies or is banished into exile or learns to live like a second-class citizen. And because of that, therefore, the powers of the day do not encourage people to be open-minded to telling each other truth, so that we as Hutus and Tutsis can begin to live together as Rwandans and try to imagine another future in which we can be equal before the law, we can have equal justice, and so on and so forth. So that's like something to introduce really the subject. And it occurs to me that there are 4 questions which I want to encourage us to think about. I won't give the answers because I think about them, I have opinions about them. The first challenge that we have in Rwanda is, for this and future generations, especially for us now, is, can really Rwandans imagine a process in which the acquisition of power and maintenance of power is not through the violent path? Because until now, we are yet to figure out smart Rwandans who are very innovators, who can imagine an experiment like other societies. Maybe I won't give an example of America because even the American democratic experience is work in progress. Every democratic experience is work in progress. It's never finished. But I always imagine, is it possible for Rwanda to imagine that people can come to power and maintain power, not through the violent path, but through a peaceful path? That's what Paul and myself and other Rwandans are beginning to preach to Rwandans. And we've discovered that actually that is it's a very difficult message, it's a difficult proposal, but we are discovering that Rwandans are very much interested in it, and that gives us hope. So that's the first challenge. Can we reimagine the process of power that is through peaceful change rather than violent and revolutionary change? That's one. Number two, is it possible to create power structures in Rwanda in which the Hutus and Tutsis and the Twas can actually feel, yes, that's where we belong. Yes, this is our government. Yes, these are our institutions. For a long time, as we've said, power was about the Tutsi kings. And you know how monarchical governments, monarchical institutions operate. I won't even spend much time on that. Or even how colonial governments operate. I won't spend time on that. But since 1959 to date, we've had governments in which either Hutus can feel, this is, even when the majority of the Hutus are marginalized, if there is a Hutu president and power in Rwanda is very much centralized, it's in the hands, in the past it was in the hands of the king, and then of course in the hands of a president, whether Hutu or Tutsi. And so even when people are marginalized, they still feel, actually this is our president. He's a Hutu president. Of course, I see it these days, and it's kind of interesting because when you talk about power in Rwanda today, and you tell the Tutsis, by the way, I happen to be a Tutsi. Maybe I should have mentioned that in the very beginning, whatever that means. If that's important to you, you should know that. Because my mother told me so. I don't see how else you could be able to figure out whether I'm Tutsi. I'm sure if I had asked you, some of you would have said I'm a Hutu, others would have said I'm a Tutsi. It doesn't matter. I'm Rwandan first, and secondarily, if I'm interested on a good day, I will say, yes, I'm a Tutsi. But to me, that's very, very much secondary. But I think the idea that people in Rwanda should be able to look at themselves into the powers that there are in Rwanda is very important, so that we don't go through these cycles of saying this is a Hutu government, this is a Tutsi government, but this is a government that represents all the people. So how do we democratize the institutions in Rwanda so that they represent everybody and they protect everybody instead of being seen as an institution or the rule of one man? Because for now, what we have in Rwanda is the rule of one man. That's the second thing. The third thing is about truth, which is the subject of today. I won't spend much of the time, but can we really use truth-telling amongst ourselves as a tool or as a mechanism of actually achieving healing and reconciliation? If you can imagine that since 1959 up to 2011, there is not a single family in Rwanda that has not been affected by the tragedy of Rwanda. Not a single family, whether Hutu or Twa or Tutsi. All of us, I'm always quick to point it out, we are like a sick nation. We're a sick nation that is in need of healing. And so I believe that I happen also to be a medical doctor, and I was taught when I was in medical school that when a patient approaches you, if the patient has an insight into how his condition, especially patients who have mental illness, but it applies to every patient, if they have an insight into their condition, you are able to work with this patient on the treatment. But if they do not know their condition, it becomes extremely difficult for this doctor to treat you, because you don't have really an insight into your condition. So I believe that we have to, Rwanda as a people, we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and look at the blemishes on our faces, the stains on our faces, the stains in our history, how we've wronged each other, but how at the same time we have a shared history, and how we have a common present, and how we have to reimagine a future that belongs to all of us. So that can only take place if we can be truthful to each other. And lastly, it's not a topic that we want to get involved in, but it's also about the well-being, the total well-being of Rwandans in general, that this has to be a shared well-being in terms of socio-economic development. You've heard many times in Rwanda these days, especially in international circles in America, the United Nations, in Britain, how Rwanda is such a wonderful place. The streets are paved. They have even, by the way, since you were last there, Ambassador Flaten, they have even planted palm trees. I understand, I haven't been there for a while. There are palm trees all the way from the international airport to... So and most foreigners will never go beyond Kigali, the capital city. So when they go to Rwanda and they come back, they say, oh, Rwanda looks beautiful, because to them, Kigali is Rwanda. And they go there, they meet government officials. I used to be Kagame's chief of staff, so I essentially ran his enterprise called Rwanda Incorporated. So we knew how to prepare a script which every government official must tell if you visit Rwanda. It's a very smart endeavor, because you almost get same answers when you go to Rwanda. If people do not keep quiet, if you ask them a question, especially if they think it's a political question, and most of them will keep quiet, they will simply tell you the same version of the story. But I think Rwanda's development is unsustainable, because unless there are basic freedoms, unless we figure out how to begin to reinvent Rwanda's politics so that we have equal space within this enterprise called Rwanda, so that there are no just losers, but we figure out how we can all be winners, it will be very difficult even to sustain even this very shallow economic development that we are talking about. I think I've taken long to make my introductory remarks, but suffice it to say that I think Peter has done an interesting and very useful effort in trying to figure out how we can simply get together, not only Rwandans but others who are interested in Rwanda, how to encourage this whole business of truth-telling. As I've said, it's not that we shall always agree with each other as Rwandans, but when we disagree, it shouldn't be that somebody else should die because they have disagreed. Because for now, that's how Rwanda is. As I keep on saying, I keep on quoting something that the famous Nigerian poet, Walso Inka, said. He said, in other societies, saying, I'm right, you are wrong, is part and parcel of normal life. And in fact, even in our families, that's how it is. Sometimes I'm a minority in my own household. But in Rwanda, it has been turned upside down. It is that if I'm right, you are not only wrong, it is that because you are wrong, then you must die. And that is something very unhealthy. And I believe part of what we are beginning today, hopefully, we shall continue to extend it to other Rwandans so that we can live in a society where each one of us is expected to die a natural death, where we can live long, healthy, and productive lives, but most importantly, live lives of freedom. Because without freedom, I think everything becomes nothing, and I think with freedom, it is possible to imagine many other things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we hear from our moderator to put a regional view on it, I'd like to make clear that I'm here because of U.S. foreign policy. in 2003, I found out that the UN tribunal had been established specifically to make certain that the U.S. ally would not be prosecuted. Because, of course, if the ally was prosecuted, the prosecution would have to ask the ally, how is it you became such a big military force in such a short time? How is it that there were these ongoing connections between the U.S., between the RPF and the Pentagon that many people don't even know about because they're in those documents? And then, more importantly, how is it that when the reports of RPF crimes were delivered to Warren Christopher, the consultation with Kofi Annan, the documents we also have, were to how to cover up the fact that the RPF was killing millions or tens of thousands of people, it's become millions, at that time. I found from reading the documents that USAID had sent a human rights investigator in to find out about these things, and he came back in September of '94 and said, yes, they're committing many, many crimes. And then we know from the documents also that a cover-up began. And according to Brian Atwood, who was the head of the Humphrey Institute a couple years ago, he said the reason that the cover-up began in September of '94 was because the State Department had not been aware of how involved the Pentagon had been with the RPF in bringing them to power. And once the State Department found out that the connection between the RPF and the Pentagon was as strong as it was, and the RPF had been committing crimes of a massive nature, it was necessary for there to be a stopgap policy to make sure the information was discredited and didn't get out. And that's what's happened in the ICTR. The result of that is that all of the jurisprudence at the ICTR has been bent to fit the outcome. It's meant that the story of what happened in Rwanda has had to be told 180 degrees from the way it actually happened. Because if, in fact, the story is told, and the reason that I was fearful for my life in Rwanda is that the documents take the Rwandan genocide and the reason for the Rwandan genocide directly back to Arlington and directly back to Foggy Bottom. And I think that the sum total of the documents show that. The U.S. has spent nearly $3 billion on the UN tribunal to make certain that only one side gets prosecuted. The U.S. has also, according to the chief prosecutor at the UN, quashed the investigations that she was under, told her that if she didn't turn over her files to the RPF government and stop the investigation, that she would be fired. When she said, I work for the UN, not for the U.S., the U.S. Ambassador Pierre Prosper said, that's what you think, you just lost your job. And so we have in 2003 evidence that in summer of 2003, the United States specifically removed the chief prosecutor at the ICTR and replaced her because she had the evidence to prosecute the RPF and President Kagame. And when she announced it, she was removed from office. Now, the problem that presents for those of us in the audience who are Americans and are concerned about the policy of the U.S. government, the thing I want to leave you with is that what the evidence shows is without the ongoing support of the Pentagon, not the State Department, because the State Department and Pentagon were not in the same place, I don't believe, in '94 based on these documents. But beyond that, that the cover-up has been so extensive since that time that essentially the RPF and Kagame have developed a particular relationship with the United States that allowed them with Uganda, who was the country that helped create Kagame, which was also an outgrowth of Pentagon policy, invaded the Congo in '96, invaded the Congo again in 1998. According to a UN report that was issued in October of 2010, Kagame and the forces sent into other countries are responsible for somewhere between 6 and 10 million lives. The occupation of the Eastern Congo is going on today, occupying an area about 14 times the size of Rwanda. The number of deaths in Rwanda far exceed anything in Darfur. The involvement of Ugandan and Rwandan forces now in the invasion of Somalia, Darfur, South Sudan, and the use of peacekeepers by these governments also has the same character. I'm mentioning the U.S. role in this because many people in Africa don't realize how involved the U.S. had been in this endeavor. And we're going to differ. just because I have these documents and I'm drawing conclusions from the documents doesn't mean that I have the truth ultimately. Because none of us has the absolute truth. All we have is the desire to search for it and the freedom to do it. And if we can do that, and the people who are watching this event around the world understand that there is this other truthful, factual-based reality, it is possible that we can change U.S. policy, because it is not in the interest of the United States people to have the United States supporting essentially the destruction of East and Central Africa and the Great Lakes region. So my objective is to change U.S. policy, not to punish anybody in Rwanda or to claim that I know the truth. But if the documents that describe what happened are not taken into consideration, documents from the UN and U.S. government are not taken into consideration, we're going to get it wrong, because everyone in Rwanda was caught up in the war, and what they see about what happened in Rwanda, of course, is affected by that, and the pain that they suffer and the loss that they had. And as Theogene said, there's no family that's been without that loss. I'm hoping that our moderator can comment a bit on the international and regional implications of the new information that we're putting before the world today. And I'm hoping that Prime Minister Galayd can give us his observations.
Prime Minister Galayd.
Thanks, Peter. I think this is one of the most important meetings I've ever been involved in, for two main reasons. I think what has been happening in Rwanda is, as an author said, it's a problem from hell. But we did not have the pleasure of really knowing who the real authors of this hellish experience have been. And I think what Peter has done has helped us and will help us enormously there is no absolute truth in this, to approximate at least what are very important aspects of this unfolding story. And what Dr. Theo has done in coming out openly and probably sharing with the world the role that the present president has done in shooting down that plane. There were suspicions, there were accusations and counter-accusations, but what, from a very authoritative position and perspective, what Theo has done is very astounding. And therefore the experience of Rwanda has very important lessons for not only Rwanda itself, but for the whole region, for East and Central Africa, and probably for Africa generally. And it has very important lessons to be learned in terms of the position of the United Nations and the US government. We are not here to pontificate and apportioning blames. We are not here to categorize anybody as the criminals and those who perpetrated the crimes. I think the story is much more complicated. In the case of Somalia, in the case of the region, the involvement of Uganda definitely complicates the Somali case. I think we have succeeded in self-destruction as Somalis, but the role of Uganda, and particularly the role of the Ugandan forces and that of Burundi, are complicating the problem even further. It appears Somalia now is very much under the mercy of regional countries, our neighbors, whether it's Kenya, we knew of Ethiopia before. But the implications of probably this is a law school, this is not a business school. probably what is unfolding in Somalia and the region is a more cost-effective way of bringing about, if not change, at least in creating an environment where the people of these countries are really hostages of powers that are not local. It's not an exaggeration that definitely Uganda has played a critical role in what the RPF has done, and the Rwandan invading forces were very much part of the Ugandan armed forces, very well trained, supported by Uganda. What Uganda is doing now in Somalia is not analogous. They are not really supporting a local group. They are imposing their will directly with the full support of the AU, the United Nations, and definitely the US administration is very supportive of that. So there are complications all around, and what is happening in Rwanda and the Great Lakes are not happening in isolation. They are affecting the whole region. They are affecting how the AU is going to deal with African problems and how the United Nations is going to be engaged in peace and security. I'd like to make two more other points. The first is that I'm very much encouraged by what Paul and Theo are trying to do. I think this idea of truth-telling and aiming for national reconciliation is a very salutary sort of endeavor, and they deserve to be helped. But what we have to know is not only the historical backdrop, it's not the context, but we know only too well that the problems are not going to be wished away, that the long road ahead is not going to be easy for the Rwandans or for the Somalis for that matter. What is crucial is the willingness to sit down together, to use peaceful dialogue, to use and to bend over backwards to try to engage in reasoned communication and ensuring that shared power and creating a common political space is what is needed. There are no victors on this. It may be generational. 1959 is not a long time ago. 1994 is not a long time ago. And the killing is still going on. And the creation of conditions that make peaceful resolution of these ongoing conflicts, we are nowhere near that unless there are people of vision, of courage, and faith. I salute somebody like Theo to say that it's not mea culpa as a Catholic, but it's human, and that needs really to be welcomed and encouraged. What I'd like to add to that is that Gramsci, the Italian communist, used to talk about the intellectuals of Italy and Europe should commit class suicide. And what he meant by that was that they have their respective class bases and orientations, and what they all needed was to aim for the higher ground, to engage in destroying the hegemonic culture that existing and was obtaining in Italy at the time and in Europe at the time. And I think probably that's the road forward. And I'm very much encouraged by what Paul, Theo, and other Rwandans are trying to do. We definitely will watch that very carefully. We have a lot to learn from them, And we hope that although the issue of politicizing ethnicity, not only in Rwanda, but the newest country, South Sudan, it has a very, very troubled road ahead of them. That we already hear that the politicization of ethnicity in southern Sudan, the Nuers and the Dinkas, is very troubling. And I think that is, as Africans, what we share, and that is where we need to help each other. And hopefully, as a newly minted American, I would very much like to see these people that have given me a perfect refuge for me and my family, and who offered me at least the opportunity to be one of them. I do hope that this country, at this moment in history, will realize what is at hand and what is happening in Africa. I hear very troubling, shrill voices in this country. It's not the best of times for us, and I'm saying this as an American. I think it's time. Was it the Prophet Micah who said, you have to walk humbly with thy God? I think the problems and the global issues that all face us are so enormous. Nobody has a monopoly on wisdom. Nobody has a monopoly on saying that I have 800 number to upstairs. I think it's absolutely essential for us to come to grips with what is happening, what has happened in Rwanda, and more importantly, what is happening, and our prayers and our thoughts are with those who want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem itself. Thank you very much. Paul has to leave fairly soon. He has to take a flight back. So what I'd like to suggest is to invite questions for the limited bit of time we have. I think Paul has to leave at 5:30, is it? Yep. Yeah. So we have about 10 minutes or 12 minutes. So, yes. So we will all stay here, and if you would kindly, the only reason we are opting for these written questions are the experience we had earlier today. I don't think we want to engage in shouting matches here. We want to take advantage of this, and hopefully people will be definitely thoughtful in giving these questions, and then the group here will do their level best to address those questions. And if anybody steps out of this, I'll put on the African dictator's hat. I'll stop them. Anybody has a written question ready? They don't have to be elegantly written, so long as they're eligible, we can at least legible, and we can read. That's the important thing. Yes. I think the logistics of collecting these questions and all of that may be so if anybody wants to raise their hand, anybody has a question or a comment?
Prime Minister, maybe I can ask the first question of Paul before he runs off.
Okay.
What do we know about organizing to build consensus, to build support for the concept of truth and reconciliation? Is this organization going on only in Europe and the United States, or is there some effort to do so in Rwanda itself?
This is a very exciting question. I sometimes like to speak louder. I don't know whether everybody hears what I'm saying. Initially, when I put up the Hotel Rwanda Rusesabagina Foundation, this was around February 2005, almost 7 years ago. My main objective was to help orphans, widows of the genocide. And I even started helping since I myself was a persona non grata in Rwanda. I was going through other organizations, NGOs, helping in Rwanda. And one of those was GFR, Global Family Rescue, which is based in Chicago. We gave them some money to go and pay school fees for children we never knew, we had never met. Our main objective was to help orphans and widows psychologically, so that each and everyone who needs help can get in from my foundation. But when the Rwandan government learned that this money was coming from my foundation, immediately GFR was given 24 hours to shut down and leave the country. Of course, many young people we had been helping, we learned that some of them were disappearing, others going to exile, and this became a problem. So I said to myself, now listen a minute, am I developing this country? Am I helping my people? No. Now how do I help? Let me now help Rwandans to come around a table. Instead of solving our troubles by force, now let us give a chance to dialogue. I'm going to initiate a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. As it happened in South Africa, that was my dream. Then we initiated this in the United States, as Ambassador Flaten says, and he also has been a part of this project. So when we initiated this in the United States, in Chicago, that is when the Rwandan ambassador in 2007 treated the three of us, Ambassador Flaten, Ambassador Kruger. Ambassador Kruger was the U.S. ambassador to Burundi between 1994 and 1996. So he's also one of those people who are very much informed, aware of what was going on in Rwanda, and we were sitting together and we were treated as gun runners. The Rwandan ambassador went even as far as saying that he saw me with Ambassador Flaten, Ambassador Kruger in Cape Town, South Africa, and he even mentioned a date. This was supposed to be January 17th, 2007. He pretended to have seen us. And that time, Ambassador Kruger and Ambassador Flaten had never met. They never knew each other. Ambassador Flaten and myself, we knew each other because we have known each other for years. But myself, I had never met with Ambassador Kruger. So how, in the name of justice and truth, can a diplomat, not any diplomat but an ambassador, say that he saw other ambassadors trading, buying guns, and sending them to rebels in the Congo? So that became very exciting and encouraged me to take it to Europe. In Europe, it was a very big, huge success. But in Rwanda, of course, the Rwandan government fears the truth. That is when you try to tell them the truth, they are very nervous. They don't want to face it. They don't want to sit down and talk. And even to you, as an audience, I sometimes wonder what you think. If you see someone who has got no right to speak out in his own country, but travels from Canada, from Kigali and comes to Minnesota, to Minneapolis or St. Paul to prevent Ambassador Flaten, Paul Rusesabagina, Theogene Rudasingwa, or even our friend Peter or the other ambassador to prevent us from speaking. He can speak in his own country, and he prevent other people from speaking wherever they are. Until, how do you take that? How do you judge it? So in Rwanda, so far, we are not yet in the country, but we are getting there because we have a lot of people who are in contact with us. Of course, we do not talk about this openly, but we have a lot of contacts within the country.
Their crimes after 94. And however, the story in Rwanda is that there had been this long-planned genocide, and that's something that, of course, is a matter of belief, and we've differed on that. And Ambassador Flaten was there to observe the genocide or the build-up to it, and to observe the conspiracy to carry out the genocide. I'm wondering, Bob, if you have any observations on knowing that none of us has the truth absolutely.
Of course, I have absolute truth. As Peter knows well, I have testified in Arusha on behalf of certain persons with whom I worked during those 3 years, people who were accused of conspiracy of genocide, and I believe firmly that they were absolutely innocent, and testified and spent many hours in front of some judges at the tribunal trying to deal with that issue of could they be actual members of that government and not be part of a conspiracy. Well, I think that Peter has outlined that the judges have come to the conclusion that it was not a government conspiracy. Now, having said that, there were people conspiring to commit genocide in Rwanda. They were part of some of the political parties even. They were in the media even. But as a government policy, that was not, from my experience working with these people, that was not the prevalent view. It happened. There were people conspiring. But so far as I could tell, those people with whom I worked were not a part of that conspiracy to genocide, as awful as it was.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I think we have come to 5:30. We'll take a very short break. We'll bid all farewell, so bear with us. We will continue answering, or at least your questions will be answered by the panel. 5 minutes. questions here. Or shall we wait for the picture taking? These questions are not addressed to anybody, any person in particular, so I'll just read them. The first one is, what is the reaction of the international community in regards to this new information, or new approach, or new...
This one?
This one's working.
Hello? No?
Want to come here?
Okay, let me... Yeah, one thing I've come to notice that truth is really, really, really very disruptive. It disrupts the person who comes with the truth. It disrupts, in the case of Rwanda, it disrupts, makes the status quo very, very uncomfortable. And it makes, especially the international community, very uncomfortable. Let me narrate to you two examples that show you the fundamental disruptive nature of truth. When this statement came out on the 1st of October, first of all, I'd been agonizing over this statement for years. And when I felt that I could no longer contain the conflict in my own life, and that week preceding the 1st of October, I determined that by the end of the week on the 1st of October, and I chose 1st of October because also that was the day of the RPF invasion into Uganda in 1990. To be honest, I didn't even want to share what I was doing with my wife. And when you live with a spouse, sooner than later they discover when you're working on something as important as that. She was not at home, but she would call. I think she would listen to my tone. She said, "Tell, what are you working on? I know you must be working on something naughty." I said, "No." And typically, I didn't even share it with the other people that I work with in my organization, or even my own brother, who is my confidant, because I knew that for certain things, somebody must carry the burden and carry the burden oneself. And once I came out, two things happened. One, it's a simple personal story I want to tell you. The other, it's part of a high-stakes game, because I was actually summoned to one of Western governments. I won't tell you which one. But they wanted to know the implications of what I had said. They were asking me such questions like, why now? And typically, when people have asked me why now, I always tell them that, like the English saying, better late than never. That is sufficient as far as I'm concerned. And then they said, what is the motivation? But one of the things they told me as I narrated this whole story about why I wanted to come out with the truth, I'm not trying to score points against Kagame so that I can become president, or I'm not trying to score votes from Hutu so that they can vote for me. I'm not looking for votes. I simply said that I just wanted to do it because I believe it's a missed step, because without us getting it right, I'm sorry to say that the bigger steps of reconciliation, of stability, and political transformation can never go very far. Because you cannot build a nation by simply basing it on the lies and very false narratives, which has been the case since 1994, the death of the president. Whatever followed is well known, both in Rwanda and the region. And so the gentlemen who are listening to me, in a very quiet, diplomatic, but very forceful, they say, but you know that what you're saying is very distracting and very disruptive. I said, yes, I know. That's precisely why I had to come out with the truth. And so at the level of governments, especially if governments, Western governments and the international community has been part of the false narrative, and you know governments are always very, very hesitant. They have a lot of inertia. Once they adopt a policy and the narrative, they stick to it. And the technocrats and everyone, they have to be unified in giving that kind of narrative. So you can see, I can imagine that there are so many many in the international community who are not happy with this confession, but we've also made sure that we say it in very emphatic ways and very strongly that we've begun a process which nobody is going to stop, that we shall push it to its logical conclusion. The logical conclusion is not to drive Kagame to the sea and kill him, no. But we are saying that just as the International Criminal Tribunal and the whole international system ganged up to try Hutus who are responsible for genocide, I would imagine that the same international system and the same government that support it, though it's uncomfortable, they must also begin to think that there shall be a time when Kagame and the few people he used to commit this crime will be brought to justice. Whether at some point we as Rwandans are going to determine that everybody who is culpable or everybody who has been found guilty is going to jail, or we are going to kill them or going to drive them to the sea, I do not believe in that. I believe that there has to be a point in time when, as Rwandans, we're going to sit and then figure out that since there are so many of us who have committed crime, what do we do with it? What do you do with people who are in Arusha, people who are in the communes on the hills in Rwanda, people like Kagame who at some point is going to be found guilty of these crimes, and others within our own organization who might have committed crimes in Rwanda and the Congo? What are we going to do with all that? How can a society begin to even imagine healing and repair when you still have a lot of this trauma that has gone on, that has so many victims? When perpetrators of today, they become victims of tomorrow. When victims of today become perpetrators of tomorrow. That is a vicious cycle. And we want to argue that we need to reimagine something new in which we can figure out how to stop the culture of impunity, but at the same time, bring out the accountability, but most importantly, figure out how to move forward. And truth-telling is so fundamental, so disruptive. And so I imagine there are some people in the international community who are not comfortable with it. Now, the personal story. The personal story is that truth-telling is so redemptive at a personal level and has a healing effect at a personal level. But most importantly, it opens doors and creates bridges which you could not even begin to imagine. When I came out with this statement, one of the things that came to my mind was, why don't I actually call the widow of the late Habyarimana, the president of Rwanda? Remember, I used to be in the rebel army. I used to be a leader of the RPF, and my enemy was Habyarimana and his government, and the Hutus in general. But once I came out with this, I said, but why don't I call actually the widow of this president and actually tell her and her children that I'm terribly sorry, even when I did not kill her husband, I did not conspire to kill her husband, but I know that I know somebody who did it, and once I knew the truth, it took me several years of going outside as a salesman, trying to convince the world that actually President Habyarimana and the other president of Rwanda and the others had actually been killed by the Hutu extremists. So I picked a phone and called the widow. I talked to her son and to her daughter, and I finally talked to her. I don't know really how to describe, and of course Rwanda has made a lot of noise saying, Theogene is doing it because he's looking for money. People who look for money in these types of things cannot even imagine that they are decent and morally upright people who can do it to redeem themselves and to help other people to redeem themselves. So Kagame always thinks money, thinks power. So he cannot think out of that kind of box. But in talking to this lady, you may wish to know that not only did Kagame kill her husband, but Kagame and RPF have made it a mission to go to France and to go to the International Criminal Tribunal and to go into the general public and say that actually this lady was part of the conspiracy and therefore she is at the center of having killed her husband so that herself and her brothers and other people could capture state power in Rwanda. Now, imagine, good people here. It's one thing to conspire to kill somebody, but why would a whole president who has absolute power in this nation of 11 million people, having killed the husband of this lady, why would he even go as far as telling France and telling other people that this lady is responsible to have killed her own husband? It's a double tragedy. And so when I talked to her, it was quite an emotional moment, and she told me that she's so happy that I've brought truth to the whole matter, and that she and her family had been waiting for this moment, and that they are praying for me, and so that it can happen to other people to come out. But you can imagine how this truth, how powerful it is in her own life and her family's life in trying to figure out a way forward. I'd say this personal story because to me that is more important than anything else, because if that story, and later on, of course, I called Mrs. Nariamira, who was the other president of Rwanda who perished in the accident, and I've talked to the children of the late Habyarimana, and one of them asked me a question. He said, by the way, what did you think about my father? What did you think about my father? She was asking me what I thought about the late President Habyarimana. And that was a very, very serious question. Because previously, I looked at all the issues of Rwanda through the prism of a strategic thinker for RPF, and everything was political, and had grown up in a refugee camp. I was coming back home, and so I had been raised in the political culture of thinking that of the zero-sum game. And so I hadn't been asked, oh, what do you think about my father? What did you think about my father? And for us parents, I have 4 children. Some of you have children, we know. We are our children's heroes. Of course, when they become teenagers, we're certainly villains. But when they're still young and probably much older, we are their heroes. And that was a very good question. I say, you know what? To be honest, I looked at your father from a political point of view. I didn't know much about your dad. I saw him once during the signing of the Arusha Peace Agreement. I was actually the guy who was doing the protocol for my chairman of the organization, and I could see President Habyarimana and the chairman of RPF here. I said I never came close to him. I said the other things which are personal I had from about your father, I had them from other people who joined the RPF, like Kanyarengwe Kano, who was the chairman of RPF, like Pastor Bizimungu, who used to work with the president, or who used to work in Rwanda, or people like Kaje Guhakwa, who used to be in that organization, and others who knew him. So I said I didn't know much about him except the politics that had been raised as a refugee, and therefore I was going back home, and his government was kind of resistant to the idea that people who have been in exile for too long should come back. And then she said, you know, our father was a very good person. She explained to me, and indeed, how else could a father be to a child? So I tell you these stories because truth-telling makes Kagame and company very angry. But for me and others who are engaged in this, it opens doors to reach out to the other side and to listen to how they are feeling. And I tell them also how I felt at that time. And in the hope of doing that, I think it does create potential for us. I took a bit of a long time to respond to that, but I think it's very important because in the last more than 30 days, time please, yes, yes, the timekeeper. It's very difficult to talk about Rwanda in a short time. And so I think it's very important to note that since this statement came out, many people, all through email, through telephones, they encourage me that it has had a very profound effect in their lives, and I believe we can build on that. Maybe we should go through the questions very quickly so that...
we can go beyond 6. So we have to go beyond 6. We have so many questions here. There's no way we can get through it in 5 minutes, so it's in the hands of our moderator.
Do the younger generations imagine themselves as Rwandans rather than the Tutsi, Twa, and Hutu?
Yeah, that's actually where our hope is. That one I can quickly answer. Because the young generation sometimes listen to us. Like one day I was, taking my daughter, who is now 14, to school much earlier. And then she asked me, said, Daddy, are we... She even disfigured it. She says, are we Hutu or... And she simply doesn't relate to it. And for example, people who were born since 1994 may not be able to exactly relate to that kind of situation. But guess what? The issue of ethnic identity has been politicized so much, and people have become victims because of their ethnic identity, that even the young people in their own households, how the parents explain it, or if they are in a refugee camp, they are always reminded, like because I grew up in a refugee camp, it became very clear that I was a refugee because I was a Tutsi. So we have so many people who are Hutus, who are in refugee camps, especially in Africa. So that kind of identity and their plight reminds them that actually they are Hutus and they are being harassed. And for people in Rwanda, of course, the young generation goes through that. But still, I would say that our sure bet will be to work with the young generation, because they might be the ones who might not be strongly attached to this whole notion of being Hutu and Tutsis, but also to tell them that it's okay to be a Hutu, it's okay to be a Tutsi, it's okay to be Twa. There is absolutely nothing wrong being a Hutu, a Tutsi, or Twa. The danger becomes if you use that as a pretext of denying other people their rights, their responsibilities and obligations as full citizens of Rwanda who are equal before the law. And so we are also telling people to be comfortable in their own skins, that they need not hide behind anything and tell lies and say, I'm not a Hutu, so that they can get a position in Kagame's regime, or to say I have a mixed blood so that Kagame can accept them more. Or as it happened even in the previous regime, sometimes people simply denied that they were not Tutsi in order to get certain positions in government. So people need to be comfortable with their own ethnicity. But at the end of the day, as Ambassador Flaten was saying, we are all Rwandans. And I think that's what really matters.
How will the teaching of history in these schools be addressed? Part 2 of the question, what should be done with the 120,000 people in the prisons?
I very often say that Rwanda we have 4 burdens. The first burden is the burden of history. if you close your eyes and you ask Rwandans to tell you the story of Rwanda, without looking at them, you can always know whether they are Hutu or Tutsi. So there is the burden of history, because each one of them highlights the wrongs that the other side has committed, and of course highlights the best that they have done. And yet it's a shared history, as we've emphasized. It also has the burden of a neighborhood. We live in a very dangerous neighborhood where flexing muscles is part of the game in order to survive. If you live in the neighborhood of Congo, of Burundi, of Uganda, you soon learn that it's the mighty that can exist in this tough neighborhood. It's some of the toughest neighborhoods, I think, on this planet. And sometimes there aren't so many good things to learn from neighbors. Instead, there are bad things to learn from neighbors. If you have a neighbor that has produced the likes of Idi Amin, genocide or killings in Burundi, continuing deaths in Congo, in Uganda, you hear so many stories. So what is the cheering news in this type of neighborhood? So we have a burden of a neighborhood. But we also have the burden of foreigners, because foreigners do not create problems for us. We create problems for ourselves, but it's also true that very often foreigners do not leave us alone to be able to find our own solutions. Sometimes when we are killing each other, it's as if the foreigners are lending us something to kill each other. But I'm not one of those people who argue that the problems of Rwanda before 94, as you remember, Ambassador Flaten, within the RPF, we used to think our problem is France and Belgium, because they love this Hutu regime, they love Hutus. And then of late, of course, since 1994, there are many people within the Hutu community who think that their problem is America, their problem is Britain, and I keep on telling them, no, the problem is ourselves. But let us also be vigilant and careful that foreigners don't lend us these destructive powers. So I would say that history is one of those difficult things. And I think truth-telling is very important, because until we come to the truth, how else shall we approach history? Because for a long time in Rwanda, since 94, we are not even teaching history, because we didn't have the version to teach. So I see this truth-telling project being part of the history that we have to tell, a history that has the bad and the good, and a history in which we see Hutus and Tutsis shifting positions between perpetrators and victims, good guys and bad guys, and figuring out how indeed this history project can finally become a project of creating the winners of tomorrow, all of us being the winners of tomorrow. It's a difficult proposal, but I think it's a doable proposal. The second part was, the prisoner, that's what I am, okay. The prison community has reduced over time, but it has reduced in a very inconclusive way, because it has gone through Gacaca, which is looked at by Hutus as the victor's justice, because it's only the Hutus who have to tell their sins, so that the Tutsis on the hill can forgive them or figure out how else to deal with them. But the problem is it doesn't also listen to how the Tutsis, especially the Tutsis within the military security establishment of RPF, were responsible on the same hills for committing very serious crimes in Rwanda and, of course, later on in the Congo. So I think that's part, once again, it's part of the challenge. We need to figure out how to tell truth to each other, and then we can sit down and say, so since we have all these prisoners, the old ones and the new ones, once Kagame and company have been brought to account for their own sins, what shall we do with that prison community that we have in this country? I, for one, sometimes I have imagined, and when I said it, I attracted a lot of hostility from Kagame's camp. They called me mad. I said there should be a time in the future. I imagine it, and it interests me, and it motivates me to imagine one day in the future of Rwanda when we do not have anybody in jail. It doesn't matter whether somebody is guilty or not. I imagine that unless we can see a point in the future when we take that bold and risky proposal and say, guess what? There are all these people liable and guilty of so many crimes. What do we do with ourselves? Do we drive all of them to the sea and kill them? Or can we imagine a time when we say, okay, we have a new calendar. This is day one in the history of Rwanda. We absolutely have no prisoners. That's something for me I keep on arguing about. I'll keep on, people will call me mad, but I want to, if I have to make a mistake, I want to argue towards a more bold and risky proposal like that one. A day in the future of Rwanda when we don't have prisoners in Rwanda and other places around Africa and in the world. And then people in future will say, okay, but in the future if you do crazy things, then we shall take a very harsh position towards you. But for now, we have to imagine something new. So that's, it's just a hypothesis. It's just a dream of mine. Maybe it's not widely shared by many people, but I want to imagine that there should be a day in the future of Rwanda when we don't have any prisoners.
It's more spiritual here.
I love that. Even before here.
Okay. Ashoka has relatively recently established an empathy initiative of any NGOs or independents work to put forth an empathy project in Rwanda based on Ashoka or other initiatives?
I honestly don't, but let me tell you one thing. This is a personal story. You won't believe it, my journey has taken me from being born into a very profoundly Christian family. I lost my father when I was bare 1 year old because of the events of Rwanda, and so I grew up under the custodianship of a very loving mother, but very spiritual Catholic mother. When I went into college, as many college students do, I turned rabidly against all matters of faith and turned very Marxist, very much on the left. Still, I don't regret much of it except the part of Marxism that told me that in order to be very progressive and modern, you have to abandon all faith. I still find very interesting proposal from the Marxist faith because it also is some kind of faith. I find there's some interesting proposals from that in terms of social and economic systems. But in 2005, I regained my faith, my Christian faith, but from a probably not so much a dogmatic point of view of I wouldn't come here and start pontificating before you and turning you into Christians, although I hear in America you quarrel a lot about matters of faith. But I became a Christian partly because I have gone in my life, I've seen so much destruction in my life. I have seen so much death in my life that sometimes I have been left also to ponder and ask myself the true meaning and purpose of life. If you are a Rwandan and you've seen the kind of destruction that we've seen in Rwanda, it really leaves you with some kind of vague emptiness, and that's part of what I went through. Many people ask, how did you get divorced from Kagame? Because we're very close, and I was his chief of staff. He didn't fire me in 2004, no. I simply told him that I was leaving. He wondered why I was leaving. I left him to guess. After some time, he realized that maybe I had something up my sleeve, some naughty plan. He was not absolutely wrong because I've resurfaced with this naughty plan of preaching peace and reconciliation. You can call it a naughty plan. But at some point, you may be seen, at the time, I might have been seen as one of those successful politicians or people close to the system, at the center of the system. I was at the center of the RPF system. And many people might have seen, oh, Theogene has really accomplished, he has arrived. And yet, at the pinnacle of all this, I felt a very vague emptiness, especially in contrast to this destruction that Rwandan people have suffered, Hutus and Tutsis, and for too long. Then you start asking yourself, what is the meaning of this? And to be honest, maybe it was too convenient to run for cover in regaining my Christian faith. But also, to be honest, I thank God for it, because only coming to Christ again could convict me in a very profound way and tell me at some point on the 1st of October that I had to tell the truth. Whether you call it my conscience or the spirit, as us Christians are fond of believing, it was that kind of spiritual milestone that I attained in my life that really shed all other pretenses and said, Theo, you are better off telling the truth rather than living a life of lies. Rwanda is a predominantly Christian nation, as you know. Sometimes people say, but how could a Christian nation have people who killed each other like savages, as we witnessed in 94 and after? But yes, it's a predominantly Christian nation. It's a very, matters of faith are very important even in ordinary people's lives. So whereas we cannot go through the spiritual route to solve political and social problems, I still believe that there is an element of spirituality and faith, especially for a broken nation. Christians understand brokenness. For a broken nation, can we also elicit in our society this whole notion of love, the notion of freedom, and the notion of forgiveness in contemplating the purpose and meaning of a Rwandan? And I said, yes, we can. But I truly, truly believe that this matter is not something that only a government can solve. I don't think so, because states are very brutal machines. It doesn't matter whether it's an American state or a Rwandan state. States were conceived in brutality and violence, as you know. For some of you, even in law, I'm sure you study all that. And so, can we try and develop civil society? Can we try and encourage the development of the press freedoms? Can we, through academic institutions like this one, promote this other soft side? I think, yes, we can. And so the spiritual dimension, I think, is very important. And I'm glad somebody asked it. But I was rather timid, because I have been told that in American public institutions that they not talk about faith. So you will bear with me. I hope you won't take me to the sea for that.
Another question, I've heard many things about the different races or tribes, such as Tutsi and Hutus, or the tribes of Somalia or Sudan. How can America, as a still segregated and racist country, try to help in these countries? Should America be involved at all? Go ahead, have your stand.
Let me have a rest. Let even South Africa, I think they should take a special about
As I mentioned earlier, is this still working now? Okay. As I mentioned earlier, I told President Habyarimana democracy is a really tough thing to do. And we've been at it for 200 years, and we're not sure that we have it right yet. And as you've noticed, we still have some serious problems ourselves. I'm not sure that answers the question.
Even Ali, you can take a shot at that. You're an African like me.
I think America is a country, although probably when we're watching the Vikings, we're all Minnesotans or Americans. especially if we are playing the what is it, the Packers. There is a good question here. How can I lose it? There was a very good question. Oh yes. If we develop a process of power as a peaceful exchange for a government that represents all of its people, how do you propose individual identification? Recognize all as Rwandan rather than Tutsi Hutu. Will assimilate, suffer, or will it create a recognition of shared power? Please.
Hello? Yeah, I think the problem with a state-inspired and state-monitored process of saying there is no Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa simply doesn't work. If this maybe had taken place 100 years ago and somebody had tried and succeeded in creating this Rwandan identity that does not refer to ethnicity, maybe it would have worked. But over the years, during the centuries, but more so during the colonial process, and especially after independence since 1959, the identities have become strongly politicized. Oh. Let me use that. The identities have become very, very, very strong. Anybody who goes to Rwanda can tell you that. Even when in public we don't say it, when we go back to our own homes, we actually become Tutsis and we become Hutus. In public they say there is no identity cards. They will say there is no that and that. But the fact of the matter is, if people died because they were Tutsis or they die because they are Hutus, you can no longer say that there are no ethnic identities. And if a government is there, and you can see that for now, it's really a Tutsi minority that is in power, especially key institutions of the government. For example, I will give you an example. If you look at Rwanda's intelligence services today, 100% they are Tutsi. In other words, you cannot figure out the top level of the government of the intelligence of Rwanda. You cannot find there a Hutu. So why would you say that Rwanda has achieved reconciliation and we only talk about Rwandans and there are no Hutus and Tutsis? You go to the military, the Minister of Defense, the Army Chief of Staff, the Chief of Defense Forces, the Permanent Secretary, the top guys in the military, 100% they are Tutsis. So when Kagame says, oh, we've reached a point where we are Rwandans, we are proud of being Rwandans, and not Hutus and Tutsis, that's not true. So I think that the ethnic identities have become very, very strong, that you can no longer legislate them out of existence. Instead, I think we need to approach it from a truth-telling perspective, that we sit down as Hutus and Tutsis, we tell each other comfortably. When I talk to Paul, he's comfortable being Hutu. If somebody calls me Tutsi, I say, that's fine. But I don't spend the sleepless nights, looking at myself in the mirror and say, oh, how wonderful it is to be Tutsi. But those who want to do that, that's their business. If somebody, is a Hutu and, every morning looks at herself or himself in the mirror and says, thank God I'm a Hutu, that's okay. But I think when it comes to matters of citizenship as Rwandans, that's where we need to look at each other and say, come on folks, maybe Hutus and Tutsis, but this country called Rwanda belongs to all of us, and we've got to figure out exactly how we are going to live together in this country within the rule of law. And I think maybe another conversation like this, since this is a school of law, we need to find time to talk about the rule of law in Rwanda, but some of the things that we're talking about are related to it. So I think it's okay, these three things, just to emphasize, these identities do exist and they have become very strong. Number two, there's nothing wrong being identified as that, but the common ground for all of us is being Rwandans, and that's what we need to encourage, and we need to build on truth in order to slowly by slowly build that kind of Rwandan identity. The questions are over?
The questions are over. There's
Thank
only
God.
one. There's one question. I think Jamal is gone, but he's asking about
Somalia.
About Somalia and what do Somalis have to learn from this process, and do they really need this to learn from this experience? Let me just say one or two comments about this. There are those who are very deterministic and say the whole idea of state building in Africa is wrong, has gone, taken the wrong way because people don't share fundamental sort of characteristics like the Europeans. The Westphalian sort of notion of one language, one culture, one religion, and all of that. And therefore, Rwanda was was not a sustainable project as a nation state. Well, you take the Somalis, and relatively speaking, Somalis don't have the major cleavages among the Rwandans or in Burundi, where you have distinct sort of histories and have these identities which are very deep-seated. But that has not saved Somalia from these internal conflicts. All you need is by the time you are 5 years old, you memorize your genealogy. It's like the Old Testament, so-and-so begat so-and-so, begat so-and-so, and it depends where you want to stop. And you relate to people. That's the map, that's the internal map, and you read your genealogy. I think what we can learn from this is the courage, the convictions of people like Theo and Paul and others who are striving to engage in truth-telling, in peaceful dialogue, in trying to have this common vision of what is to be done. If there's anything to be learned, I think that's what Somalis and others have to learn. And it doesn't look, it's not very promising, I hate to say, for the simple reason that there's no organized effort that I know of which is looking through that kind of perspective in trying to strive for the shared history and culture and build upon that. Unfortunately, that's not probably, we are not ripe for a solution yet. I'd just like to summarize all you. Yes, fine. I just want, as the person who was pretending to be the moderator, I'd like to say a couple of comments. I think, as I said earlier, this has been a very, very productive engagement, discourse, and I think, I'm really sorry to say, but I actually expected more people to be interested in this, because this really has a very, very serious sort of discussion on fundamental issues in a specific country and in terms of recent history. Was it Chou En-lai who was asked to comment on the French Revolution, and he said it's too recent, we cannot talk about it because it's too recent. I think Rwandan experience, probably even for a Rwandan, is too recent. The deep wounds, even going back to 1959. But I think the effort to, normally the research that's done in Africa, I call it extractive research. And what that means is an analogy from all the mining that goes on. The minerals are taken and you leave very big holes out there. What happens to the research? It's always taken out. It ends up in beautiful libraries in Europe and developed countries. I hope, and the beginning here of even the taping all of this and going it on stream and for people in Africa to hear this, I think this is a wonderful, wonderful step. And this cannot be called extractive, although one can turn around and say, and how many Somalis have television and have access to computer and will be, eating up all of this. I think it's a very good beginning, and I'm very encouraged at what Peter and this university college are doing in terms of making this research effort something that is of direct relevance to everyday politics in a place like Rwanda, in a place like Kigali, where people can, at least if they have access to this kind of exercise, if Theo and Peter cannot be allowed to have this engagement in the university in Kigali or in one of the suburbs, at least it can be done from a distance. But how do we make sure that this work is available? How do we make sure this incredible, in terms of files and documentation here, is made available at least to those who are being trained on the traditional legal fields, and the future generations of not only Rwanda, but the Nigerians, Ethiopians, and whoever. I think we all need that. And I want to thank and encourage Peter to keep up the good work. I was really very concerned. I was out of the country when I heard over the BBC and actually CNN that he was in prison in Kigali. I was extremely worried for his life. I'm glad he made it, that his life was saved and he's with us and is doing this wonderful work. This is my first time I'm meeting the ambassador, Theo and Paul. I think it's a wonderful group, and I have become a member, honorary member of these enemies of the Rwandan state. I think by association I'm going to be part of this crowd, so I will postpone any future plans to go to Kigali. Yes, sir. Yes. And you have been a very wonderful group audience, and I hope this flame will be kept very much lit, and hopefully will be of direct relevance, as I was saying, to what's happening back home in Africa. Thank you very much.
Well, we're certainly past the time we originally had scheduled, but I've been thinking about this from the standpoint of the person who introduced me to a deeper story of Rwanda than I would have been able to find out myself, and that's Ambassador Flaten. It's a bit emotional because Ambassador Flaten put himself on the line about truth-telling when the rest of the world had concluded that I was a genocide denier because of the propaganda coming from not only Kigali but from the United States. And actually, it was the CIA that had me in custody in Rwanda, not the Rwandan government, because the U.S. Embassy had reports that I was going to be arrested the night before I was arrested. They didn't tell me. So it wasn't a completely Rwandan operation that had me in prison in Kigali. But I'm imagining, knowing Bob as I do, that the great hopes and the great work that he had put into the Arusha Accords process. Thank you. I'll take it. For nearly 4 years of his life, Bob put everything he had into making the Arusha Accords process work. He tried to warn all parties of what was coming after the Burundian tragedy. And then he went to the State Department and worked 24 hours a day during the genocide, trying to make sure that things kept on track the best he could. And now the information that's coming out is also beginning to explain how difficult it was to accomplish what his goals were, not because of his shortcomings, but because of issues beyond what people were wrestling with at that time. And I'm hoping it'll favor us and the people watching with your thoughts about having been through this experience now, that I hope puts the kind of truth and reconciliation on the agenda that you worked so hard for these many years ago back on the agenda. And maybe we could have a few comments from you before we close.
Speaking the truth is a lot harder for somebody like Dale and Paul, who are threatened by it personally, physically, as well as emotionally, than it is for an outsider. But I believe that if we are going to help in any way overcome the kinds of animosities which have led to murders, we have to speak to each other in truth and hope that that will lead us to be able to get along in some reasonable way together. I will close with the humorous one note. When I would invite Rwandans to come to my office, I would always serve coffee. And usually I would give them a cup that had big golden rim by the American Embassy and showing that this was the American Embassy. But I drank for another cup. I drank from a mug which said, "Love me, I'm Norwegian." I tried to tell Rwandans that was the only real message we have. We have our ethnic roots, and we're proud of them. But that doesn't in any way interfere with me being the ambassador of the United States of America. So love me, I'm Norwegian. Love each other.
I've got a few, just one remark in closing, and then we'll be available to talk. This event was put together very quickly. It's broadcast to the world because its intention is not to affect just people's thinking here in St. Paul, Minnesota, but to affect people's thinking worldwide. What we now know is that the entire story told about how the Rwandan genocide came about was a manufactured story created in the Rwanda Tribunal by the United States, financed by the United States, and we in the United States have a responsibility for straightening this out. What's going on in Africa now is a tragedy, and it's going to continue as long as U.S. foreign policy is not in the hands of people like Bob Flaten, but is in the hands of people like those who run the State Department, or in the Pentagon, rather. And right now we have an outsized foreign policy based on a State Department that has about the same budget as the military bands do in the Pentagon, within the Pentagon. We've got a big struggle. And if the American people are going to save the America that we're proudest of, to help Africa, it's going to start here in the United States. The Rwandans and Africans have their responsibilities, but we have them here too. So we're hoping to live up to those responsibilities to the people around the world who are seeing this for the first time. But we will not stop, because truth is the only way that reconciliation is possible, and it's the only way we can build our nations. And I want to thank all of the gentlemen who came here tonight to help do this, because this is just the beginning. As Paul told us earlier, his coalition, his campaign is going on, Truth and Reconciliation. We have the truth because we have the documentation, and in the long run, I think we will prevail. But these gentlemen made it possible to take this message to the world, and I thank all of them.